Okay, so we stopped there. We stopped at different realizations of Wasserstein gradient flows of functionals, and we were considering the Wasserstein gradient flow of the negative entropy. So I'd like maybe to just remind you some stuff on the board quickly. Okay, so forget about the slides for 1 second. So we've been considering this kind of optimization problems. We've been constructing associated dynamics, Wasserstein gradient flows, looking like this. Oops, this is well, this is the gradient of the first variation. Okay. I had several questions, so in my slides, I denoted this thing to be the Wasserstein 2 gradient of F. Okay, it might be an abuse of notation, so depending on the communities, if you look at papers from the optimal transport community, they would call this whole thing the gradient of F with respect to the Wasserstein 2 distance, okay, adopting Riemannian perspective. In my case, I abuse a bit the notation. I'm not the only one. In machine learning papers, you would often find that this notation refers to this thing that is a vector field pushing the particles. Okay, so you would find slightly different notations depending on the community. So this is the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing, okay, so adopting my notations, I told you, okay, if I want to implement this kind of dynamics, if I want to simulate them, one choice I have is to consider these dynamics so particles pushed by this velocity field. Okay, I know that this, guys, if I denote mu t the law of xt, I know that they are following the gradient flow. Okay, and I've been asked the question, how do I implement this? It's very simple. If we've seen first example, potential energy, I've said, okay, we can consider these dynamics. Okay, xt following minus gradient of v. This, you know how to discretize it. We've seen it yesterday. You can do gradient descent, implicit discretizations, and so on. Okay, so this is easy to implement. And then we've seen a second example, that is this thing, the negative entropy. And if I follow, so we know that the vector field ruling the dynamics of this gradient flow is grad log mu t. So I know that I can write its gradient flow dynamics as follows, and equivalently, writing that this thing is grad mu t over mu t, I get Laplacian of mu t. Okay, so it tells me, if I look at this equation, it tells me I have two ways to implement the gradient flow, like two dynamics whose law mu t will satisfy this equation. If I look on that side, I can think, okay, I will apply the same recipe, and the first process I can consider is this one. Okay, where mu t is the law of xt. This is a deterministic process. It depends on its law. It means that in practice, if I want to simulate this thing, I need to discretize in time, but I also need to approximate mu t, typically with a system of interacting particles, using maybe a kernel density estimate to plug it here. Okay? This is the first possibility, what people in diffusion models would call probability flow. And the second possibility is the Brownian motion. Okay? Okay, this is stochastic. And it's law, so both of these processes, this one is stochastic, both of these processes, their law mu t satisfy this equation. Okay, so I have two ways to simulate the gradient flow of the negative entropy. Any questions until here? No? Okay, so if this is clear, I will go on with the slides. Okay, so let's continue. If that works. I will go this way. Yes. Okay. All right. So now let's go to the case of the Kullback-Leibler divergence optimization. I recall that the Kullback-Leibler is the sum of a potential energy and a negative entropy up to a constant. So you have two ways to implement this Wasserstein gradient flow. The first one would be through Langevin diffusion. Okay, so a particle pushed by this grad V, gradient of the potential, plus some Brownian motion. The vector field ruling the dynamics, okay, so the mu t, the law of this thing, would be grad log mu t over pi, minus grad log mu t over pi. So this is just combining example 1 and 3, so gradient flow of potential, gradient flow of entropy. And we get the following equation that if you expand it once again, you recognize the Fokker-Planck equation. So this, we are happy. We know it indeed decreases the KL, okay? It realizes the Wasserstein gradient flow of the KL. So this is, I didn't cite it again here, but I cited earlier in my slides. This is the result of Jordan, Kinderlehrer, Otto, who described the Langevin diffusion as follows. And applying the same recipe as here, I tell you, okay, I also have the choice to consider a deterministic process whose evolution depends on its slow mu t. It's an alternative realization of the Wasserstein gradient flow of the KL. Okay, so what is the take-home message for this part? As in optimization, if you consider Wasserstein gradient flows, it gives you some dynamics to decrease your objective function. And if you discretize it, it yields some sampling algorithm. Okay, so we will see this just after. So it will enable us to, one, design a sampling algorithm, which is relative to the question I had of how do you implement these things? How do I simulate this? And it's also useful to analyze sampling algorithms. All right. So before investigating and showing you a quick tour of sampling algorithms that you could use in practice, I will first describe some tools and properties you can inherit from Wasserstein gradient flows. All right. So the first step I mentioned a bit earlier is the following. We are very happy with the fact that Wasserstein gradient flows indeed decrease the functional. And this, what do we see here? We have a chain rule, that is to say, if I compute what is the dissipation, the time derivative of my energy, the F, along the flow mu t, I will get, so what is written in 1, the L2 scalar product between Vt and its Wasserstein gradient. Where does it come from? You just write the chain rule. With the first variation, you get F prime mu t x d mu t x dt dx. Okay? And then you plug what is on the right here. You plug divergence mu t grad Wasserstein 2 f mu t at x, of course. You do an integration by parts, and you're happy to recover grad Wasserstein 2 of f mu t x dt. So this thing, sorry, I will just write it. Yes, let me write it as follows for now, okay, where Vt will be this minus gradient. So you see that from the chain rule, you indeed obtain some L2 norm between the gradient of your objective in the Wasserstein sense and the velocity field ruling your dynamics. Okay? Is this computation clear? So we are very happy. It's exactly the same structure we had when we were doing Euclidean optimization. We were checking what was the time derivative of the objective v, and we had grad v x t dot. Now the equivalent is to get the Wasserstein gradient of f, so this gradient of the first variation, scalar product with vt, the velocity field ruling the dynamics of mu t. Okay? Now, if you use, secondly, that you are following the gradient flow, you know that vt is minus the gradient, so you get indeed that the dissipation is proportional to minus the square norm of the gradient. Any questions? Did the coffee help or still not? Okay, so this is the former slide was showing what we get for any gradient flows. We didn't have any assumptions on f. At least we need to be able to define its gradient flow, but very mild assumptions. Now, if you have a function that is strongly convex in the Wasserstein 2 geometry, so I recall we defined these strong convexity notions. We were looking at f along a Wasserstein geodesic, and we were upper bounding it by its interpolation and the term proportional to the Wasserstein 2 distance. If you have this property, then you can prove the equivalent thing that we had in Euclidean optimization. If you have my slides in mind, in the finite dimensional setting, we were upper bounding the dissipation of xt minus x star, the global minimizer of V. So now we are doing the same, where the Euclidean distance squared is replaced with the Wasserstein 2 distance squared. Okay, so you should have in mind that Wasserstein 2 distance plays really an analog role to the Euclidean distance. And you can show that you have this inequality that is referred to as the evolution variational inequality. It's very important when analyzing the convergence. And in particular, in that case, if lambda is strictly greater than 0, if you take nu to be pi, the global minimizer, if you use Grunwald lemma, you can show that the Wasserstein 2 distance squared between mu t and pi converges to 0 exponentially fast. Okay? Okay, so this was in the case of strongly convex functional. I didn't say it, but we already know that these things are convex. If V is convex, one way to get a strongly convex functional would be to ask for V to be strongly convex, which is a strong property, right? If you think of V strongly convex, it means that, for instance, you're considering a Gaussian. Okay, so this thing is one strongly convex, so basically your pi is this distribution, okay? Maybe you want to ask for less, and this can be captured by functional inequalities. So functional inequalities can be seen as, in some sense, maybe one of the most minimal conditions you can ask for your flow to converge very fast. What do we know? We know already, this is the top of the slide, that for any function f, functional, it decreases proportionally to minus the squared norm of the gradient. Okay, this is very immediate. Now, if I have a functional inequality, which is the second line here, that tells me that I can always upper bound the square norm of the gradient by the functional itself. I didn't write the computations, but you can do it mentally. It's quite simple. You know that above, you can upper bound the dissipation by minus 2 lambda f at mu t. You apply Grunwald, and it gives you exponential convergence of f to 0. Okay? So this is what is written here. And at the moment, functional inequality, it sounds a bit like a magical tool that gives you a linear convergence. But you have no idea about what it's telling you on the functional itself. If you're very careful, you can see that actually, you don't need this thing to hold for any mu, but you just need it to hold along the flow, which could be even more a minimal assumption. So let's try to understand what this functional inequality tells us in some specific cases. So in the case where f is the Kullback-Leibler divergence between mu and pi, these functional inequalities are very well known. Okay, the one I wrote above is basically known as the log-Sobolev condition. So let's write it this way. We have that the KL, so sorry I wrote it reversely, the functional is smaller than 1 over 2 lambda, and here I recognize the Wasserstein gradient, okay, the grad log mu over pi. This quantity here is also actually a divergence between probability measures. It's known as the Fisher divergence in machine learning or relative Fisher entropy in the optimal transport community. And we actually know a lot of stuff on this inequality. We know conditions under which it's satisfied. Typically, it's a generalization of being strongly log concave, which means that pi is proportional to E of minus V with V strongly convex. Okay, so if you have a Gaussian like this, you have a strongly convex potential, it satisfies this. But it's actually more general. We will see it on the slide just after. You can have target probability distributions pi that are not log concave, okay, where V is not convex, but that still satisfies this. I'm mentioning also the fact, so Jose has been working on these functional inequalities for related functionals where you add interaction energy term. Okay, so this is an example of probability distribution satisfying log Sobolev assumption. So I'm considering a Gaussian, and now if I consider a bounded perturbation of a Gaussian, you see that my target is not log concave anymore, right? I cannot write it anymore as E of minus V with V convex. I can only write it as E of minus V plus G where G is bounded. And in that case, it will satisfy a log Sobolev condition, but the lambda will not be 1. It will be a bit degraded. I don't know what's the word in English, but basically, if your perturbation is small, your lambda will be close to 1, and if not, you get a less good log Sobolev constant. Okay? Any questions until here? Is it clear? What does it say? So it tells you you have a lot of problems which are not convex, but who are almost convex. Okay, and you should recognize as well what we've seen in the previous section, the one of about Euclidean flows, where we've seen Polyakh-Novakovic inequalities. Where we had functions like this that were not convex, but nice enough. Okay, so this is a bit the analog. We know that optimization and sampling algorithms will work well in that setting. All right. Okay, so let's go back to sampling as optimization. This is our objective. I will skip this. Yes. I should have. Ah, yes. Sorry, it was a bit. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so let's go back to our problem, and now we'll see how to discretize it and how to get optimization algorithm. So we know the continuous time dynamics that are the following. Okay, we've described the Wasserstein gradient flows through such continuity equations. Now we can ask ourselves how to discretize this at the level of measures, okay, at the level of probability distributions. We know that this is a flow, a path of distributions that stays on the manifold, okay, that is following the gradient with respect to that metric. The first way you can discretize this flow is analogous to gradient descent. It will be an explicit Euler discretization. It's written as follows. So what does it say? It says I fix a step size gamma, and now at iteration m, I would push mu m by the map that is the identity minus gamma, the step size, times the Wasserstein gradient. Okay, so this has a very nice interpretation of Riemannian gradient descent, because you can think of being in your manifold P2 in blue, you're at point mu m, you consider the vector field, the direction in L2 of mu m, and basically this operation of identity minus gamma gradient push forward is seen as the exponential map, bringing you back to the manifold. Okay? In practice, if you remember what the image measure is, and why is that just a generalization of gradient descent, I've said if x is distributed as mu, t of x is distributed as t push forward mu. Okay, so now if mu m, let's say, is a Dirac at x m, when I write identity minus gamma grad f mu m push forward mu m, it means that I'm applying this map to xm, okay? I can write xm plus 1 is xm minus gamma, this function, okay, that is a map from RD to RD. Okay, if xm is distributed as mu m, okay, maybe let me write it that way. If xm is distributed as mu m, then I know that this point, xm plus 1, that is xm, so I apply the identity map, minus gamma, this map applied at xm, is indeed following mu m plus 1. Okay, so you should recognize gradient descent. The only difference is that depending on the functional, you have a dependence on mu m here. If you have a potential energy, this dependence disappears, because this would be grad v. Otherwise, you keep a dependence on the law of x here. Okay, any question on this forward scheme? Okay, so think of it as explicit time discretization. If you have a population of particles distributed as mu m, applying this map, okay, an explicit time discretization, you can see it as a Wasserstein gradient descent scheme, like a Riemannian gradient descent scheme. What is written at the bottom of the slide is what I was commenting here. Of course, this thing requires, in the case of the KL, some estimate of mu m, that is the current distribution of the time discrete iterate. Okay. The alternative discretization is the one that is much more common in the optimal transport field, where people would consider implicit time discretization, okay, that are referred to JKO schemes because of Jordan, Kinderlehrer, Otto, and they optimize this problem. They say at each step, I want to find mu m plus 1, the distribution that minimizes my functional plus a penalization with respect to the Wasserstein 2 distance. Once again, if you remember what we did in the Euclidean flow setting, I've said when you consider backward or implicit time discretization like this, you always decrease, right? You just write your problem, your functional will always decrease at each iteration, no matter you have absolutely no condition on the step size. But it's expensive to compute. If you think of high-dimensional distributions, you have to solve this at each step, and it's very costly. There have been a ton of methods implemented on, to solve these problems. But I have to say that some methods that were proposed in the PD community, like relying on grids, are just not applicable in the machine learning setting. The dimensions of the parameter are just too big. So it's unfortunately not adopted in that case. In contrast, the forward or explicit method we've seen earlier, you will have to work to show similarly that if you have some smoothness of your functional, if you choose the step size small enough, then it will decrease and so on. And it's cheaper. And furthermore, you can also work, so this, I've been working on this with Adil and Julia. As in Euclidean optimization, if you have a functional that is defined as the sum of two functionals, you can play with the time discretizations. You can do, for instance, if f is smooth and you can define its Wasserstein gradient, you can do an explicit time discretization on the first term. And if the second one is not smooth and JKO is more appropriate, you can do a JKO step. All these schemes are unbiased, as in the case of Euclidean optimization. If you remember well, what I said in Euclidean optimization was that gradient descent, proximal point, forward, backward were unbiased in the sense that if you consider gradient descent written like this, let's say V is strongly convex, you have a global optimum x star. If you're at x star, your scheme will not move, okay? So it keeps the global optimizer. Similarly, if you had implicit or backward gradient descent, you would have this, you would have the same property. And if you consider a splitting scheme like forward, backward, it will keep the minimizer unchanged, right? One step of forward will move you, but the step backward will bring you back to x star. So this is why these schemes are unbiased for a fixed step size gamma. I'm insisting on this because we see that Langevin-Monte Carlo is typically a biased scheme. Any questions here? Okay, let's go to Langevin-Monte Carlo. That is the most canonical algorithm in sampling, the analog of gradient descent. Okay, so recall that our goal in life, at least you and me this morning, is to sample from pi, exponential minus v. Langevin-Monte Carlo was introduced in that paper, in 1996. It works as follows. You start from x0, a particle distributed as mu0, and you run this. Okay, so you should recognize some time discretization of a Langevin diffusion we've seen earlier. You have like a gradient descent step pushing xm through a minus gradient v, and you have some noise term, eta m, okay, standard Gaussian noise that is scaled by the step size. Okay, so it's a discretization of a Langevin diffusion. Let's see what's happening if we look at the distribution of this guy. I can rewrite Langevin Monte Carlo as follows. It's not from me, it's from this great paper of André Vibisonneau called Sampling as Optimization, which really started a huge line of work. What does he say in this paper? He says, oh, but Langevin Monte Carlo, I can write it as a splitting scheme where the half first step, I just push xm by the minus gradient term, and then I write that xm plus 1, it's xm plus 1 over 2 plus noise. But if you think of what it's doing on the space of probability measures, you should recognize that the first step is doing this explicit, this forward alert time discretization, okay, of some potential energy term. I think I would write it here, right? Remember that F, that is the KL, it's basically this term, this functional, plus constant. Okay, so the first step basically corresponds to doing an explicit time discretization on the potential energy. But then, this term here is exactly solving the heat equation. There's no discretization. It's a bit weird, but here, this step is neither implementing an explicit or implicit discretization of the negative entropy flow. So it's not the same kind of discretization as forward-backward that I showed you earlier. It's doing forward flow. This is how it's referred to in the paper of Vibisonneau. And the problem is with that operation is that I told you earlier that if you do forward-backward, if you are the global optimizer, for a fixed step size, the forward step will move you from x star, but the backward step will bring you back. And the problem with that discretization is that this breaks, because the backward, like this, operation is not the adjoint of the forward discretization. So it's very clearly explained in this paper of Vibisonneau that for a fixed step size gamma, Langevin Monte Carlo will be a biased scheme. You will not recover pi. You will recover some stationary distribution pi depending on gamma, pi indexed by gamma if you wish. Any questions? Okay. So this is important because then in the analysis of Langevin Monte Carlo, so I told you yesterday that there was this line of work starting from the analysis of Langevin Monte Carlo through the lens of optimal transport, optimization, and so on, like adapting this analysis of gradient flows. If you look at papers in Langevin Monte Carlo, all these guarantees, they highlight that indeed it's a gradient flow, but there is this bias. For instance, you can show that for a smooth potential, I didn't write it here, but you can have descent properties in discrete time. Okay, you can show that the KL of the law of the iterate at time n plus 1 indeed decreases proportionally to the square norm of the gradient. There are some technicalities. It's not exactly evaluated at mu m or mu m plus 1 for forward or backward. It's something in between. Plus some bias term gamma. Before, we didn't have this bias term. Okay, when we were doing gradient descent schemes or even implicit, we didn't have this bias term proportional to gamma the step size. L is the smoothness of the potential. Sorry, I didn't say it. So if your potential is, has a gradient that is L Lipschitz, and D is the dimension. So from this, you can already obtain a non-convex type of guarantees. As in Euclidean optimization, I said, if you have a descent lemma, you can basically iterate this inequality and get a guarantee on the average of the square norm of the gradients. So it was done in that paper. You just rewrite that the square norm of the gradient is this Fisher divergence, okay, that is the divergence between measures. It's just a matter of notation, but it has this convenient property of separating measures. And iterating the descent lemma, you get that the average square norm of the gradient, hence the Fisher divergence, is smaller than something decreasing at 1 over m, the number of iterations, plus some bias. Okay, so we recover this speed for the average norm of the gradient. And I don't say it here, But in this paper, no, sorry, I cited a bit earlier, but a paper by my colleague Adil and Krishna Balabsuramanian. From this, you can actually work a bit and show that the sequence of iterates mu m will converge to pi. You will lose the rate, okay? But you can work, actually, they show that you can extract a converging subsequence of the iterates to pi. And since you use that this Fisher divergence is lower semi-continuous, that it converges to 0 thanks to this, this thing. And since it separates measure, it gives you that the convergence subsequence is converging to pi. Okay, so it's actually a nice thing to work with, even in the non-convex case. Okay, now if you want to go further, we've seen that we could ask something like a log-Sobolev inequality that is not convexity of the potential, but something like a bit more relaxed. If you have such inequalities, you can show exponential rates up to some bias. So typically, here, the bias you see, the final bias, you don't converge to pi, converge to pi up to some bias that is linear in gamma, the step size that you've chosen in the beginning. People in machine learning, what would they do with this result? They would say, okay, now if I want to achieve some epsilon accuracy for this thing at the end of my algorithm, I need to scale gamma and m, the number of iterations, as follows. Okay, it gives them some, to balance the two terms. I wanted to make another comment. What was it? Yes. I don't talk about it in this course, but so you see there is some bias due to the discretization. When I discuss with people working on Langevin Monte Carlo Bayesian inference, apparently the community divides a bit into the people who do not care about the bias because they say, oh, I'm sampling some distribution in some high dimensional space. I have other problems than the bias. I just explore some modes and I have other problems. It's not a big deal. So they would just work with Langevin Monte Carlo biased as it is. And there are some people who care about the bias and that will basically modify the algorithm to correct the bias. And there are a few ways to do this. Either, basically, you decrease the step size. Okay, if you decrease the step size, you will remove this bias. The problem is that if you decrease the step size, in practice, you do not move anymore. At the end, when you have a too small step size, you don't move. And there are people considering MALA, so Metropolis Adjusted Langevin algorithm. They, instead of accepting every new iteration of Langevin Monte Carlo, you add the Metropolis Hastings steps that basically, from time to time, discard the samples in a manner that debias the algorithm. Awaken? No? All right, let's continue. I will be a bit fast on that part, but so people can have been working again, so you can recognize here if you have a potential that is strongly convex, you can work on the evolution variational inequality to get something discrete, to get rates in Wasserstein to distance when the potential is strongly convex. Okay, so this is what is written here, like this thing, and I will skip this a bit. Right, maybe I'll finish in advance, I see. Okay, any questions on Langevin Monte Carlo before we go to Stein-Variational gradient descent? No. Okay, so now you already know very well the most basic sampling algorithm, Langevin Monte Carlo. You know how it works. You know its discretization problems. I didn't talk about the convergence, but at least, I mean, the practical convergence. We had the rates and so on. Now let's have a tour about Stein-Variational gradient descent. That was this particle scheme I showed yesterday. Okay, so this paper, I've told you yesterday as well that in the machine learning community, before the years 2016, 2018, there was not a huge interest into interacting particle systems. But at that time, this paper came out. There was also a line of work on neural network optimizations using interacting particle systems, but everything came at the same time. And this scheme is very different in nature than Langevin Monte Carlo we've seen before. So it came out using the following iteration. So it's using, from the start of the algorithm, capital N particles. And you pick a kernel. Sorry, I didn't give the definition here, but I give it on the next slide. Think of a Gaussian kernel, for instance, something smooth. And what the scheme does is that it pushes the particle positions through this map. Okay, so you have a vector field that is basically evaluating the gradient of V but at other particles, reweighting this force by the similarity, the kernel between particle I and particle J, and some repulsive force. Okay, so this is what the scheme is doing. It's very simple to implement. You just need to pick n particles, a kernel, and a step size, and you run this. So a few details, some stuff that we've seen yesterday. So yeah, maybe to be, yes. I will give some interpretation as a gradient descent scheme of this SVGD algorithm. But for this, I need to recall you some definition we've seen yesterday. I've defined yesterday, I don't know if you remember, for a PSD kernel, so for instance, a Gaussian kernel, you can define an associated space of functions, Hilbert space, that is called the reproducing kernel Hilbert space. And basically, this is the closure of the span of kernel functions. Okay, so it gives you functions from RD to RD, okay, written as follows, and limits of these functions. And once again, this is something I've said yesterday, but if you have a Gaussian kernel, these spaces are known to be included in C infinity functions. If you have something without the square, you can relate it to a Sobolev space, and so on and so on. There are many things known on these spaces depending on the kernel. An interesting fact is the last one, actually, that will be important for the interpretation I give on the next slide, is that if your kernel is square integrable, then HK is a subspace of L2 of mu. And L2 of mu, I've introduced it earlier as the tangent space of the Wasserstein space. Okay, so this is a simple, just simple recall of what it was in practice for a Gaussian density. Okay, I have initial particles. This is my Gaussian target. I see that particles, their trajectories here are first attracted to the mode and then spread. And, oh, sorry. Yes, and this is the interpretation on the Wasserstein space. If we look at what's happening on the space of probability distributions. Let me rewrite mu m as the empirical measure of the particles. I can write the update we've seen as the following. I can write it as mu m being pushed forwarded by the map identity minus gamma the step size times h mu m. What is this h mu m? Is this thing, okay, the integral grad v times k minus gradient of k respect to mu. And this h mu, you can rewrite it as the Wasserstein gradient of the KL, this grad log mu over pi, that you have mapped through this operator p mu. Okay, so p mu, I write it as an operator from L2 of mu to hk, that is convoluting the function, here my gradient of the KL, with the kernel and mu. Okay? If you remind what we've done in Euclidean optimization, I said when you multiply the gradient by a PSD matrix, you are basically preconditioning, changing the metric. It's exactly what's happening here. Okay, so we have this original Wasserstein gradient of the KL, grad log mu over pi, and we precondition it by this operator p mu. So p mu, you should think of it as something from L2 of mu to hk, the RKHS, because it takes a function f and basically it mixes it with the kernel. Okay, so you can see it as the sum of kernel functions, and this is why it's in the RKHS. I add a small remark at the bottom of the slide. If you want to really be super formal about things, you need to write things with the injection from the RKHS to L2 and so on. So in my papers, I use this formalism, but it's a bit heavy, so I don't use it here. So think of this preconditioner p mu, taking a gradient in L2 and sending it to a smaller subspace, hk. So then it's very nice because you have this gradient descent interpretation of SVGD that is summarized in this figure. I still have my manifold P2. I take a distribution mu m. I could take the original gradient of the KL, this thing, but I don't do this. I precondition it through the operator and I get this h mu m. So grad f, you can think of it as being in the original tangent space in brown. You precondition it, you end up in this smaller subset in yellow, and then you map it back through the exponential map to the manifold. Okay? So you have this interpretation of as Stein-Vachon gradient descent, it's not exactly taking the forward discretization of the KL, it's preconditioning it. It's kind of restricting to smooth directions, okay? Because if you have a smooth kernel, HK is smooth functions, so this is what you're doing. Another nice interpretation, very related, is the one that is at the top of the slide. Recall that, once again, in Euclidean optimization, I said if you do a Taylor expansion in some metric, if you identify in the metric you have chosen something in the scalar product with respect to your perturbation, then this is your gradient in that metric. We've seen when we had the L2 mu scalar product, we ended up with grad log mu over pi for the KL. Here, if you do the same thing, but you change the scalar product to HK, you will end up with this thing. So it's really similar to the preconditioning we've seen in RD. Okay? And last thing, I mentioned these papers. So Liu is still the same author as the one who introduced SVGD, and this paper of Duncan et al. They showed, once again, it's another interpretation, but very related, that SVGD is a gradient flow of the Kullback-Leibler divergence, so follows the gradient flow of the Kullback-Leibler divergence, not with respect to the Wasserstein-2 metric, but with respect to a kernelized metric that I write WK. Okay, so you can see it as in several ways. Either like this, see, you change the metric Wasserstein-2 to Wasserstein-K here, and it's also equal to P mu T grad Wasserstein-2 F ut. Okay, so either you see it as a preconditioner applied to this, or as a gradient with respect to a different metric, you have the choice. And for those who are familiar with these notations, this is a Benamou-Brenier formula of the Wasserstein-2 distance, but where you have replaced the L2 norm of the vector field by the RHS norm, that is a stronger norm. Okay? All right. Oops. All right. Let me check. Still have time. All right, so if we continue, this is some result you can get with the SVGD algorithm. So what we got in this paper of mine in 2020 was the following. If mu_m has a density, you can prove at each step that the scheme decreases. So this is different than for Langevin Monte Carlo. Remember that in Langevin Monte Carlo we had that the KL was decreasing, proportional to minus the square norm of the gradient plus some bias due to the discretization. So here it seems that the scheme is unbiased. It's not clear because we don't have global convergence guarantees, but it seems it's unbiased. And there is I don't detail it a lot here, but if you remember what we've done in Euclidean optimization, I said to get a descent lemma, for gradient descent, you need the step size to be smaller than 1 over the smoothness constant. So you need your function to be smooth. And for proximal iterations, you don't need any smoothness. So here, we get something saying that the objective decreases at each iteration. That is the KL, okay, for something that is kind of gradient descent. And there is an interesting fact that the KL is not smooth, actually. It's not a smooth object. If you try to write it in the Wasserstein geometry and to describe smoothness, it is not a smooth objective, but since you are restricting to smooth directions, you can prove such descent lemmas. Okay. Going further, very interestingly, this square norm of the gradient we have in SVGD. So it's something that writes as this preconditioned gradient of the KL, okay, mapped by the operator P mu in some space HK. And it's actually a discrepancy, some divergence between measures. If you remember a few slides ago when we were doing Langevin Monte Carlo, we had the Fisher divergence. We had the L2 norm of grad log mu over pi. Okay, that was also separating measures. So here we have something different. People have been referring to as a kernel relative Fisher, right? I don't know if Jose agrees. In machine learning, people refer to it as kernel-Stein discrepancy. And it's a very convenient thing because it separates measures. Okay, so from the descent lemma we had before, we can prove such things that here, for instance, is the KSD between average iterates is decreasing as 1 over m. We don't have a bias like in Langevin Monte Carlo because it's, we have this strict descent lemma. Some comments on the KSD here. As the Fisher divergence is an object that can metrize weak convergence in some cases. So when I say some cases, it depends on the kernel and the target pi. There are also some issues. There are cases where it doesn't work, like it fails to metrize convergence. It's explained in this very nice paper. And yes, the result, the result above, so it implies the kernel-Stein discrepancy. And I want to make some comment. The KSD, so I didn't write it here, it's a discrepancy that is very convenient in that case. So KSD between mu and pi. So it's this thing. Sorry, H. So here you use this thing. P mu grad log mu over pi in H. If you recall what is this thing, it's a kind of convolution, right? I write this, this object, mu over pi of x, k x dot d mu of x. Same thing here. And you can play with expanding this and the reproducing properties that tells you that kx dot times ky dot in H is equal to kxy. And in the end, you get a very nice expression. You get that this thing writes as a double integral with respect to mu of some kernel that depends on pi. And here I don't write the expression, but this thing just write with respect to k and grad log pi. So it's a very interesting object because if I give you mu that is discrete, it's fine here because I have integrals with respect to mu, so it's computable. And if I know the unnormalized density of pi only, I can compute this kernel because it only depends on grad log pi. So it's a discrepancy that is used actually as a way to measure, for instance, the quality of your sampling algorithm, because in sampling, you have access to pi up to its unnormalized density. You don't know pi entirely. And maybe you have iterates of some algorithms, like your Langevin Monte Carlo iterates or SVGD, and then you can compare them through this thing. If I ask you any other distance, you won't be able to compare pi and mu, where you know pi up to normalized density and mu discrete. Okay, so this was the first comment. And yes, some other comments on these results. So what I'm saying here is the following. So what we proved in these papers was that if you have densities at each step, then you have this kind of result, but it's not satisfying because SVGD works with finite number of particles. And also we know that this thing is defined for discrete measures, but we cannot prove it. And then there was a lot of work trying to capture the relationship with time and number of particles to get a convergence of SVGD. So either in continuous time, I can mention that Rosé, Kuba, Yetro are working on this, in discrete time as well in these papers. And finally, we've seen earlier functional inequalities. Okay, we've seen that functional inequalities were like relaxation of convexity, and that were kind of the minimal assumption you can ask for fast convergence. So here, the appropriate functional inequality would be something like this, because the KSD is the square norm of our gradient, and KL is our objective. So if we had something like this, we would have fast convergence. It would be the equivalent of log Sobolev. And unfortunately, there are many negative results about when pi and the kernel k will fail to satisfy this. So it's a bit unsatisfying because there is a mismatch between theory and practice, where in practice the algorithm still works quite well. Any questions or? Nope. I go on? Okay. other examples. So here I gave you a tour of the most, like Langevin Monte Carlo was the most basic. SVGD is quite different in nature, so I wanted to introduce it because it gives you a hint of very different approximations you can use for pi. But if you go to the sampling literature, the literature is huge. Every day there are tons of papers published on Langevin, especially, SVGD a bit, but Langevin particularly because it's really the analog of gradient descent. And people have designed then more advanced versions of these algorithms. For instance, if you want to accelerate the scheme, if you want to sample from probability distribution with constraints, then you may require schemes related to mirror descent. So mirror descent, basically, they are a generalization of gradient descent schemes where you impose through a different geometry than the Euclidean geometry that your samples remain in a constraint set. You can do the same since Langevin is generalizing gradient descent. You can basically design mirror Langevin schemes. You can design mirror SVGD schemes. So you can see these papers are very recent, and they only, so the constraint sampling problem is quite recent. And I've been working on this recently as well. I've been asked as well at the coffee break about non-smooth potentials. Like if you have, for instance, pi proportional to E of minus V. If V is smooth, you can do this grad V. If V is not smooth, but written as V1 plus V2, where this thing is smooth, this thing is not smooth, you can do splitting schemes, okay, for this, this part. So people have been working on this. It plays a role in Bayesian inference, for instance, when you want to impose non-smooth penalties on your parameters, the parameters of your model, and so on. Yes?
Can you briefly explain what does mirror descent mean?
Great question. It's my favorite algorithm. Okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes for this, but it's worth it. What? Mirror descent. I mean, there is SVGD as well, but it's, yeah. So who has heard about mirror descent here? Okay. Okay, so I will write in RD, okay? In RD, we want to do this. Okay? Let's say I consider implicit time discretization. I want to minimize V of x plus some penalization given by the squared Euclidean distance. Okay? This is what we refer to as backward Euler implicit time discretization. Okay, so this is implicit. If I want to do gradient descent now, I need to linearize this. I need to say, okay, V of x is approximately V of xm plus grad V at xm, x minus xm. Okay, I plug this here. I get gradient descent. So V of xm, I don't care, because I don't minimize over this, plus grad V at xm, x minus xm. Okay, and I keep this squared Euclidean distance optimization, penalization, sorry. Okay, I do this. You compute the first order conditions of this. Okay, here I'm optimizing a big function g of x. Let's look at what is the gradient of g of x to solve this. Grad g, so this is linear in x, I get grad v at xm. And if I take the gradient of this, I get plus 1 over gamma x minus xm. Okay, so this first order condition, if you put this to 0, it tells you, okay, that you recover gradient descent algorithm, xm plus 1 is xm minus gamma grad v, yes, at xm. Okay, so this is gradient descent. Now, let's say you have access to, let's define an object, phi on RD to R, strictly convex, smooth, and I write this thing. So it's called the Bregman divergence. And I define it to be phi of x minus phi of y minus grad phi of, oh, I need to be in the right direction, grad phi of y, x minus y. Here I define it to be this thing. If you take phi of x to be 1 over 2 x minus y squared, oh, x squared, you plug this here, you will recover the squared Euclidean distance. Now, this is more general, okay? People have been working, for instance, if you take phi to be this, x log x, basically you will get a KL between x and y. Okay, but the interesting... Sorry? Yes, relative entropy. Sorry. So you see it's much more general. And now if you replace the squared Euclidean distance with this, and you write the first order condition, so I have this scheme. So this is a mirror distance scheme, what I'm writing. Up like this, grad v xm, x minus xm, plus 1 over gamma d phi x xm. I use what is above here. I write the first order condition. And the first order condition, so I still optimize this function. I have linear term in xm, grad v, plus 1 over gamma. And here, if I look at this and I differentiate with respect to x, I will get grad phi of x. And here I get, if this is linear, I get minus grad phi at xm equals 0. This is my first order condition. So you see that my scheme is telling me, I know that grad phi at xm plus 1 is equal to grad phi at xm minus 1 over gamma grad v at xm. Oh, gamma, sorry. So it's the same scheme as mirror descent here, but I first have mapped x to grad phi. So this is why it's called mirror descent, because I don't know if I can write here. I can write here. Think of your primal space here. You have a point xm. You have a map. Nabla phi is called the mirror map. You map it here, xm plus 1. Sorry, nabla phi, xm plus 1, xm, sorry. You do the gradient descent step there. You arrive at grad phi xm plus 1. So there is this notion of primal and dual, and this is why you do the mirror descent in the dual. The thing is now you need to come back to xm plus 1. Okay? So you need to be able to implement xm plus 1 is grad phi minus 1 of everything here. Okay? So you need to choose a mirror map that does this. And basically, if you look at this mirror map, if you write this scheme, here you will get something like log x m plus 1 equals log x xm minus gamma the gradient. Sorry, it's very small. Let me write it with the log. You get something like log xm plus 1 equal log xm minus gamma gradient v. So the reverse map, like if you want to recover xm plus 1, you need to exponentiate. And here you can see a bit why mirror descent is adapted to constraints. Because, for instance, if I want to optimize over points in the simplex, I want these points to be positive. This iteration, it keeps the points positive because I only keep multiplying them by something exponential minus something. So if you choose a mirror map that is adapted to your constraint, this enforces that your iterates stay in the constraint set. Okay. So short story of mirror descent. So normally, yeah, phi is referred to as the Bregman potential. This thing is the Bregman potential. Nabla phi is the mirror map because it's the one that really maps. Okay, I need to map x through Nabla phi of x. And d phi is the Bregman divergence. So it's a very good question because, for instance, for Langevin, so mirror descent for RD, it's well defined. It's you can have a very nice convergence guarantees, showing once again it's unbiased when it converges and so on. So I've mentioned things like smoothness and convexity with respect to the underlying geometry. Typically, if you want to get nice guarantees for mirror descent, you need to change the notion of smoothness from the Euclidean smoothness and convexity similarly to the one induced by these things. And for when you adapt these schemes to Langevin, it's not easy because you need as well your noise to respect the constraint, and the noise you need basically to scale the noise by this the Hessian of phi, if I remember well, and this is tricky, either for the implementation or for the proofs. But yeah. All right. Questions on this? Yes? It's a very good question. So what you're asking is that basically, so we know when things work well. So there is a way to write that, I will write informally, but basically if you consider the Bregman divergence associated to your objective, let's write it this way. If you get something like this, let's say alpha d phi. Okay, here I'm in RD. Okay, I have an objective V. I can write the associated Bregman divergence. Here I pick any Bregman divergence respect to phi. So if I take phi to be the squared distance, this recovers the notion of convexity and smoothness in RD. Okay, you can play with it. It's exactly writing this. And if you change the phi, you get another condition. So what I'm saying is that this tells you, okay, the objective is smooth and convex relative to the geometry I choose, Euclidean or mirror. So what I know is that indeed, normally what you have is that you have a fixed objective and you check on a case-by-case basis regarding V and phi whether you satisfy such conditions. Your question, if I understand well, is let's say I have a V and I basically like search or optimize over phi, over all the geometries possible to find the one that is the best, with the best constants. This I don't know how to do. At the moment, what I know to do is to check on a case-by-case basis. You give me V, you give me phi, and what are the constants? What are, like, is this true, and what are the constants? But I don't know how to pick a V and optimize over the phi. If that's your question. There may be methods related to it when, for instance, you do Newton, like the metric you consider is given by the Hessian of V inverse. There is maybe an optimal speed regarding this, but yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable with going further than this. Thank you. Other questions? Yes? Yes, thank you. All right, let's go. Where are we? Yes, we were here. So just to tell you that, yeah, I presented the most basic version of Langevin, but every concept that we have seen, you can go further, but there are many things you can recycle, many intuitions you can get through what we've seen for now. All right, I will skip this. And yes. Let me check something. Yes. All right. So I want to talk about other gradient flows for the last part of the talk, because we've been focusing a lot on the case of the KL. But there are many problems in machine learning, and maybe in your applications as well, that can be cast as optimization problems like this, but maybe with different functionals than the KL. So if you remember what we've been through at the beginning of the course, even in this setting where I want to approximate some target probability distribution, the only thing I need to do is to choose a divergence D that is 0 only when mu equals pi. Okay? We've seen the KL was convenient when I knew pi up to its unnormalized density. It's not the only objective that satisfies this, and maybe there are applications where I'm not in the Bayesian inference setting, like generative modeling. I have samples, I don't know anything on the density, and I may want to choose something else than the KL. So let me go through a bit the choice of objectives that we had a hint about it yesterday. There are many discrepancies you can choose. We've seen an example of F divergence, that was the KL, okay, defined as the density ratio through a function F convex. We've seen integral probability metrics, okay, the second choice here. Defined, they're comparing distributions to the difference of their integrals over a class of sufficiently rich functions. We've seen the maximum indiscrepancy that I will recall. And you can think about even optimal transport distances, like you can pick the Wasserstein 1 distance that also can be written like this over one Lipschitz functions. You can think of the Wasserstein 2 distance that cannot be written like this, almost, but not. Or people have been playing, for instance, with entropic optimal transport. They have been optimizing the Sinkorn divergence. If you're curious about it, I can tell you more, but it's a nice object because it inherits a lot of the nice properties of optimal transport to compare probability distributions, but it's fast to compute and it's unbiased. For a fixed epsilon, this is 0 when mu equals nu. It's something of great interest in the machine learning community. Okay, so you pick your objective D in one of these things, for instance, and we've seen earlier that we have a way to design paths of distributions, decreasing your objective with steepest descent with respect to the Wasserstein 2 distance. Hopefully transporting some mu0 initial probability distribution to your target. And it gives us a kind of general recipe that I tried to summarize on this slide. It's quite informal, but still. We have this generic dynamics. You plug your favorite objective there. If you are able to compute this thing, the gradient of the first variation, then you have an associated deterministic process. We've seen it's not the only one. For instance, for the entropy, we've seen that we had both deterministic and a stochastic. But I can consider this one. At least I know how it looks like. And then I can discretize it in space and time. We've seen that there are many ways to discretize, forward, backward, and so on. The one I choose on this slide is forward because it's cheap and I like cheap things, just for math. Here I wrote as well that we need to discretize this in space because the process depends on its low mu-t. Okay, so here I wrote as if this guy was always defined for empirical measures. It's not always the case. You may have to approximate it, but think of it this way. That this is the most basic discretization of this. In particular, if I take a step back, if you choose originally an objective that is well defined for discrete measures, for instance, not maybe the KL, that is infinity if you have mu and pi discrete with different support, but think of an integral probability metric, it's well defined, then this is just a fancy way to write gradient descent over positions of the particles. Okay? So you should think of this. If I define this capital F over all the positions of the particles, gradient descent over these positions is equivalent to Wasserstein gradient descent of the associated functional. Okay, so I have now a cheap recipe for sampling. And there is a huge literature in generative modeling So we've seen Bayesian inference before, but if you think of generative modeling, people are playing with the F to take what are good objectives in terms of tractability, in terms of geometry, like properties of convergence of their flow, and then the discretization. But you can already play a lot with this. I think I will, yeah. So I want to give two last examples of flows. I want to talk about the chi-square flow and the MMD flow, and then you're free. So we've talked a lot about the Kullback-Leibler divergence flow. That is an example of a F divergence. I want to mention some stuff we know about the chi-square flow. The chi-square flow is another example of F divergence, where you recognize that we have something defined as the ratio of mu over pi, mapped through a convex function. Here the convex function f of x is x minus 1 squared. It's convex. It's 0 when f equals is evaluated at 1, so it's indeed a F divergence. So it inherits some problems of the KL, because once again, if mu and pi are discrete with different support, it's plus infinity. I can compute its Wasserstein gradient, but you see, so here what I do is the same exercise as before. I have a loss, okay, so this guy, I fix pi. I can compute the first variation, so the differential with respect to mu. I will basically get mu over pi, and then I take its gradient, so I get the Wasserstein gradient of this thing. The problem here, and I think I didn't insist on this for the KL, is that when I had grad log pi, recall that pi is proportional to E of minus V. It's very convenient because I know it's grad V. It does not depend on the normalization constant, right? If I know that pi is equal to pi tilde over Z, where pi tilde equal E of minus V, then grad log pi equals grad log pi tilde, okay? The thing to see is that this is grad pi tilde over pi tilde, which is grad pi over pi. Okay, so it's many different ways to write that when you take grad log pi, the normalization constant disappears. Here, it doesn't exactly disappear because we don't have log, okay? We have grad pi directly. So it's a bit of an issue in practice. However, it's an interesting gradient flow that might be interesting to simulate, and I'm hiding a bit here, but I've been working on this flow, for instance, and many other people. First, because, for instance, we know that the chi-square is bigger than the KL for any distributions. So it means that if you manage to minimize the chi-square, okay, to run its gradient flow, hopefully it converges, then you also minimize the KL. Secondly, we know that there are nice functional inequalities that also guarantee fast convergence. We've seen log Sobolev for the KL flow. For the chi-square flow, if we have a Poincaré inequality, so I will detail a bit, we also have fast convergence. We just need to measure it in KL. So let's think about what is a Poincaré inequality. You can write it formally like this for smooth functions f. Okay, so if you are able to bound this thing as some Cp constants grad f squared, you take Cp the smallest constant satisfying this. Okay, so we say in that case that pi satisfies the Poincaré inequality. It's a bit mysterious for now. It's very convenient because if you write the dissipation of the KL, so it's not the chi-square, but along chi-square flow, then the thing that appears is exactly of this form 12. And basically using 12 applied to this function f, you get what you want. You get that it's smaller than minus chi-square and minus KL. You apply Grandval, it gives you exponential convergence. So it's very nice because it tells you, okay, if I satisfy your Poincaré inequality, this flow converges exponentially fast when I measure it in KL. And Poincaré inequality is something that is weaker than log Sobolev. Okay, so log Sobolev, we know it's satisfied for functions that are almost strongly log concave, like you think of a Gaussian that you perturb a bit, but it still has like this E of minus x squared tails. Poincaré, you can have things with heavier tails of order E of minus x. So, yeah, so it's very nice. And actually, it's a bit of an open question, I think, but there are cases, for instance, when the target satisfies even weaker functional inequalities, and we have nice guarantees on its chi-square flow. for the KL flow, I don't know what we can say in the same setting. Okay, so this is what I wanted to mention on K-square flow. Any questions? Otherwise, we can go to the last application of the course, that is MMD flow, and I want to slightly talk about neural networks. So I consider a completely different functional. I consider the MMD above. Okay, the MMD, remember, it was an integral probability metric, something defined as follows. Okay, I had MMD squared, I think, I don't remember. So the MMD is this one. So what is an integral probability metric? I need to compare mu and pi to integrals, and here it was the RKHS ball. Okay, so it was something like this. And it has this very nice property that you can write in closed form. You should notice something is that if I'm considering such sampling problem, Bayesian inference, or here it's more adapted to the generative modeling case where we have samples. If I fix pi, this is fixed. So the MMD is expanded as above. So what I get in these two integrals, I get a double integral, okay, let me write it quick, with respect to mu. So this is an interaction energy with respect to mu. I get a second integral with respect to pi, but actually this one is fixed. So it's a constant, an additive constant of my objective. And then I have a last term that is this thing, that is a double integral, with respect to mu and pi. So I will write it in that order, pi and mu. And this is nice because it's a potential energy where this is my potential. Okay, so you can see that the MMD is different than the KL. KL, we had something that was potential energy plus negative entropy, whereas here we will have something that is proportional to an interaction energy plus potential energy. Okay? Now you can do the same exercise as before, which are the computations there. You can compute the first variation. So here you should recognize the first variation of an interaction energy. Okay, I had something quadratic. When I differentiate, I get something linear in mu. And here I get something that is the potential when I was differentiating my potential energy. Okay? The Wasserstein gradient, you take the gradient of this thing. Here I assumed it was regular. I can put the gradient inside. And I get the associated process, same exercise as before, and the associated particle system. Okay? Since the MMD is well defined for discrete measures, as I said earlier, if you start by the finite dimensional setting, you write gradient descent. Here what I wrote above is once again a fancy way to write things. Any questions on this? So why is it important, the MMD? I've talked about generative modeling. It's one way. I don't describe it in these slides, but in other slides of mine on my website. But maybe an interesting application where it appears is the optimization of neural networks. So let me describe it. So what do I present here? Forget about Bayesian inference and so on. It's another application. And it's related to when I started the course yesterday, I told you that there was this line of work on interacting particle systems, either from the sampling community or from optimizing neural networks. So this is what I'm going to talk about here. Okay, let's consider a neural network. What a neural network does, it's taking an input, a vector W, think of an image, and it's outputting some label. Okay, so think of as a label Y, maybe some scores over your image related to some classification, like is it a cat or a dog or something. But let's think about regression. Okay, I have an input W and I output a vector Y. So if I want to minimize the loss, if I have some data distribution, which are written here, so I have some couples WY, okay, so features describing, let's say, an image with associated label. I want to minimize the following. I want to minimize the square norm, in the case of regression here, between y, the true label, and the output of my neural network. So here I've considered a very simple neural network where I have the input w, and I have only one hidden layer. Okay, so I have functions, phi, parameterized by x, taking as input the vector w. Okay, and each of these neurons is parameterized by some x1, x2, to xn, if I have n neurons. So the output of the neural network is just a linear combination of all the output of the neurons, which is what is written here, y hat. I have an input w, and I have this output that is a linear combination of the activation function. Okay, so this is a one hidden layer neural network. It's the most simple neural network you can think of. Now, if you play the game of thinking that n, the number of neurons, go to infinity, so this gets infinity, and then this finite sum writes as an integral, right, over phi x, where it's an integral with respect to mu that is a probability distribution over the parameters of your network. So you go from a problem that was about finding the best n parameters of your neurons to the best distribution over the parameters of your network. And what you want to find is the minimum of this functional over the space of probability distributions over Rd that is the space of parameters. So optimizing a neural network can be seen as finding the minimum of this guy. It was at the heart of this series of papers analyzing the dynamics of weights learning for neural nets through gradient flows. And also in a paper of ours, we underline some interesting fact. That is the following. This functional, for now, you may see no link with distance or divergence as we've seen before. But actually, if you play a bit, you can. Because, for instance, if you think that your true label y, the label of your data, is actually the output of a neural network for some weights x1 to xm, let's think about this. It means that you have indeed a probability distribution like this, your target writes like this, and you can rewrite this functional as an MMD. Okay, because this thing, if y, the true label, can be written like this, you can write it as an integral with respect to pi, and then you can play with this, you expand the squares, and you can recover an MMD. I will show it on the next slide, it's very quick, but this is what you do, right? You plug the integrals, you expand the squares, you exchange expectation, and you can identify this to an MMD, whose expression, I recall it here, where you have a kernel between parameters, x prime, that is a kernel depending on the data and the activation functions. Okay, so the computation, I've given it in the slides, is very fast, but this is what I've told, expanding the squares, exchanging expectation, and so on. And I'm almost done. All right, so to conclude this part, what we've seen was the following. We've seen that sampling, so sampling, I've said, is this generic task of approximating a target probability distribution. There are many applications. There are the Bayesian inference one, there is a generative modeling one, there is this neural network optimization one. This can be seen as an optimization problem, but over the Wasserstein space. That is the space of probability distributions with bounded second moment equipped with the Wasserstein 2 distance. So in many cases, we've seen, so this, I said here's the KL, but we've seen actually some other cases. Once you have gradient flows, Wasserstein gradient flows, you have continuous time dynamics that actually do what you want. Okay, they decrease the loss. And if you want to implement them, you need to go back to an associated process in RD and to discretize it in space and time. Okay, it gives you sampling algorithm, typically. Reversely, you can think of, oh, maybe I'm interested in algorithm. Can I write it as a Wasserstein gradient flow? This is what happens for neural networks. Okay, so, and we've seen finally that this optimization point of view, it gives you really like intuitive tools. If you think about gradient flows in RD and their discretizations, what we've seen in this course are just generalizations and analogies of this. Okay, so I will stop here and thank you for listening. This is